Labour have been since 2015, since the near wipeout after the referendum.
I suppose the caveats are it's a by-election, isn't it, Nick? And what does that mean? How much can we extrapolate, if you like, from this?
Well, I mean, that's always the case with by-elections. It doesn't stop us getting excited about them, by the way, and talking a lot about the results. I think if you're the SNP, you're sitting there this afternoon thinking, we need to figure out a way to get our voters enthused again. Remember in 2017, the SNP vote didn't turn out. In 2019, it did, and that was the difference between winning quite a low number of seats and quite a high number of seats. So I reckon if you're in SNP HQ, you're going to figure out you're going to try and figure out anyway, what you need to do before next year to make sure your voters are turning out. However, if you think of the position that Labour have often been in going into general elections, they've not really looked like winning at Westminster. There's been a lot of division in the party, sometimes between London and Edinburgh. There's been a reluctance to answer the independence question. It feels like independence isn't being put to Keir Starmer as much as it might have in the past. It feels a bit like Labour really think they're on the march in London, and all of that is perfect circumstances for the Labour Party in Scotland. And if they win in Scotland, if they win big in Scotland, it makes winning a general election at UK level a lot easier, and it makes a majority a lot more feasible.
Hamza Yousaf, the First Minister, will be speaking a bit later on today. We'll have some of that. But what are the Nats saying to you overnight and this morning?
I think they're pretty disappointed in the result, perhaps inevitably. I think it's worse than they thought it was going to be. There is some head scratching going on, there's some soul searching going on. I don't think many SNP people thought they were going to win, so they were ready for this loss. What they will try and do is say there's a lot of specific circumstances here. There's the situation with Margaret Ferrier and the party they say being associated with that. There is the police investigation into party funding. The arrest and release without charge of Nicola Sturgeon definitely damaged the political brand. So I think they will try and say, look, this is just one bad result, we can recover from this. But it does feel just now like Scottish politics is at a crossroads. And this could be a moment we look back on as a big change. I suppose the fact we're saying it could be means it might not be as well.
Well, that was the BBC's chief political correspondent Nick Erdley there. I caught up with him in Rutherglen a bit earlier today. SNP leader Hamza Yousaf blames Margaret Ferrier's COVID scandal for his party's loss, but he's not the only one. Having spoken to many local residents, it seems that they do too. So if you cast your mind back, it was 2020, we were in lockdown, COVID was rife. Ms Ferrier took a COVID test, but she didn't isolate. Instead, she visited several local businesses, including a local hair and beauty salon. Well, earlier I went along to the salon. Here's what happened. I'm just outside the beauty salon in the suburbs of Rutherglen, where Margaret Ferrier visited just over 3 years ago after she'd taken a coronavirus test. I was speaking to the owner, who didn't want to speak on tape, but she said it did seem quite a long time ago, but she absolutely understands why people are still angry. She said herself that she's doesn't feel the same emotion that she did at the time, and certainly when she found out that Margaret Ferrier had taken a test which turned out to be positive. It's quite a small salon, there's maybe about 5 or 6 chairs in it, but the owner certainly said that she does understand that people are still angry at what happened. Well, what should the SNP do next, and does the party need to rethink its strategy? Also, what does Labour's victory in the by-election tell us about their chances in the next general election? Stephen Gethins is the former SNP MP, and Andrew Little is former Scottish Labour advisor. Good to have you both with us. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening. Good evening.
Stephen, first of all, what's your reaction to the results?
Well, it's obviously a disappointing result, and I think Nick in his report there touched upon a few issues. The SNP really needs to think about this. People will obviously be disappointed at the loss. On the other hand, you know, it's the sort of thing that it's a by-election, and I can remember being a member of the SNP when you win by-elections, like I think about the one in Glasgow, and then you get a thumping victory, and of course it doesn't deliver subsequently. But so I think it would be a mistake not to take the lessons, but also I think it would be a mistake just to read the lessons into one electoral contest. You've got to look at things in the round. You've got to look at what are people caring about, you know. So the polls are important, focus groups are important, but actually something SNP MPs will be doing, and I'm sure Labour members and other political parties will be doing, is chapping doors and speaking to people as well. That'll be an important part. So I think it's an important election. It's important to take lessons from the election, but it's one contest, and you need to take a more rounded view of these things.
Okay, well, let's bring in Andy Liddell. What do you make of the results? Obviously, a Labour victory, majority over 17,000. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think clearly this is an absolutely historic moment in Scottish politics. I think it's something that we'll look back in decades' time as a real turning point. I think it's clear that, yes, the voters are tired of a Conservative government in Westminster, but they're also tired of a failed SNP government in Holyrood as well. And I think they've made that resoundingly clear. And of course, I think the crucial point here is that, yes, there are extenuating circumstances, as you alluded to in your report with Margaret Ferrier, but the reality is you don't get a swing of 20% because of a couple of months of turmoil or some local issues like that. This is the result of voters being fed up with the years of broken promises, and I think people are really starting to look at Labour again in a positive light.
And Stephen, it was interesting, I was out speaking to people this morning in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, and I lost count of the people that said to me simply, we just want change. Some people did mention Margaret Ferrier and how angry they were, but a lot of people said, listen, we just want a change. How does the SNP counter that? Because if people are going towards we just want someone new, how do you stop that?
Well, look, things are pretty chaotic and messy, certainly at Westminster. One thing I'd pick up with Andrew, look, and having been there as an SNP member, when you get a big by-election win and you think it's going to translate and then it doesn't, I think there's always got to be a warning about these things. I mean, there was an opinion poll out this afternoon which showed the SNP in the lead, albeit narrowly, against the Labour Party for Westminster and Holyrood. Now, that's not to say the election's a year away. There's a lot of things that can happen between now and the Westminster election, and 3 years before the next Holyrood campaign. But it's why I always think you need to take the more rounded approach. I mean, we've heard so many by-elections where people say what Andrew's just said, this is a big, historic, thumping election win. And sometimes it is, you know, but we only know that in years gone by in places like Hamilton and elsewhere. But actually you don't know it at the time. And sometimes it's about how parties react. Do you take on board the lessons? Do you take the vast range of lessons? This is one by-election, a particular set of circumstances, very disappointing for the SNP. But I think sometimes parties are wrong if they have a knee-jerk reaction to one electoral test. And as I've said, even though the SNP's been in government for 16 years, Labour have yet to score a lead in opinion polls. In the same way, they're 20 points clear of the Tories down south, and yet that doesn't seem to be translating in the same way. That being said, the SNP cannot be in any way complacent, as last night showed, and there's a lot for all the parties, I think, to work their way through just now.
And Andy, Labour threw everything at this by-election, didn't they? And the activists were being bussed up, I think, from Newcastle. They had activists up from London. Obviously, it was a massive target for them, but that can't be sustained, can it, in a general election? You can't put that amount of resources. How do you keep that momentum going? How does Labour keep that momentum going?
Well, I think it's obviously a good thing that Labour has passionate activists from across the country who want to come and campaign for Labour victories. I mean, clearly you are able to put more resources into a by-election campaign, but I do think the overall momentum now is very much behind Labour, both at the UK level and at the Scottish level. And I think my friends who are still work for the party and former colleagues, are very, very enthused and excited, as you'd expect. I take Stephen's point very much that you can't necessarily read too much into by-election results, but I think this really does feel like a change moment, a crossroads, I think Nick described it as, and that gives huge enthusiasm to Labour activists, and to be blunt, encouragement that they haven't had for a decade or more in Scotland, and I think people are really eager to get out and win a Labour government.
Stephen, how much do you think the Margaret Ferrier situation and the ongoing police investigation play in the SNP losing this seat and the Labour vote? How big a factor was that? Hamza Yousaf mentioned them both, obviously.
I think it was a factor. I spoke to friends who, that it came up on the doors. It was obviously a really unfortunate set of circumstances to be fighting the by-election. It was, it was Labour's top target in Scotland. Let's not forget, although they did get that good result, it was their top target. But I think there was a broader point here. You heard that slightly in the reaction, which is, yes, that played a factor. So over the next year, how do you start framing it? Well, I was listening to SNP politicians today, rightly talking about the pro-Brexit Labour Party. So what you'll see is that sharpening up of the debate and the argument. Can Labour win some of the seats they need to win in England on a pro-Brexit platform whilst maintaining support north of the border? We know, there was another poll out today that showed independence remains relatively popular. The country's, it's about 50-50. Brexit remains unpopular. The Scottish governing institutions remain more trusted than the UK governing institutions. So that's not to say the SNP don't have a job on their hands. They do. But if you look at some of the base points, there's a challenge for the SNP, but I would argue there's also a challenge for the Labour Party in terms of some of its key messages going forward as well. And I would warn my friends in the Labour Party against any kind of complacency, because that's, and I think the SNP will certainly not be complacent, and this is a real wake-up call for strategists and campaigners.
Andy, do you want to briefly respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think Stephen makes some good points. I would obviously disagree with the fact that Labour's a pro-Brexit party. I just think that's not the case, and indeed I think that trying to kind of push those lines, I think most people in Scotland are intelligent enough to realise that that's not the case, and that the way to get change, the way to move on from the kind of broken Tory government is to vote Labour at the general election.
Stephen,
sorry, Labour wants to be outside the European Union. It is therefore a pro-Brexit party. Sorry, I don't think you can argue Labour's not sorry. Andrew makes some good points, but Labour believes in being outside the European Union. That's hitting the economy, hitting jobs, hitting opportunities. So I think we all need to see
how is voting SNP going to change any of that?
Well, I think the only way, because you've now got Labour, the Conservatives, the Liberals, who want to stay outside the EU. We know that's hitting jobs, that's hitting opportunities. It's independence, which is the way to rejoin the EU and have the same kind of equal partnership as everybody else in Europe
and
has.
Stephen, are people speaking about independence? Are people talking about it on the streets?
Yeah, people are talking about it. People are certainly talking about Brexit, because I was chatting to somebody in the street the other night who owns a small business. He's got a great brewery, cannot now import to where his wife's family come from in France because of all the implications. Opportunities. We're the first political generation to leave fewer opportunities for the generations who come after us than we had because of the rights that have been taken away. It's hitting the economy. Everybody throughout Europe can see how damaging it is, and that's why the polls consistently show that people want to rejoin the European Union.
People are worried about cost of living, though, Stephen, aren't they?
Well, but it's the cost of living. Look, food, but we know that food, there was an LSE report coming out. Inflation is partly being driven, very significantly being driven by Brexit. It's being driven by other factors, but Brexit's making it worse. It makes your food costs higher, it makes your energy costs higher, and therefore it hits the cost of living. So look, I think we're here to discuss more broadly. That is something that for as long as Labour pursue a pro-Brexit line, they will be challenged on that.
Andy, very quickly.
Challenged on that.
Very quickly.
I would just say, I think the notion, Stephen's obviously a very, very intelligent man, professor at my alma mater of St Andrews, but the notion that independence is somehow a solution to stop Brexit is clearly nonsense, and I think that the way to get the closer relationship that we need with the EU is to vote Labour and ensure there's a Labour government in Westminster.
Right, I didn't see it going this way, gentlemen, but it has, so we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Stephen Gethans, the former SNP MP, and Andrew Liddell, the former Scottish Labour advisor. It's 5:20, lots still to come on drive time. You've heard of blessing people and maybe even at a push houses, but what about your hamster or your snail? Well, there's pet blessing happening in churches, and we're going to be speaking about that in the next 40 minutes or so. Now, 4 days before Police Scotland's new Chief Constable arrives to start work, the force has announced it's postponing the recruitment of 200 new officers as it tries to avoid a multi-million-pound budget overspend. The Police Federation says it means the total number of officers could fall to its lowest level since the SNP came to power. Our Home Affairs correspondent David Cowan is here to tell us more. Let's start with today's announcement. What has the force said it's going to do, Dave?
Well, the force is talking about a number of things, Fiona. The first is that it's postponed the planned intake of around 200 probationary constables who are due to join in January. All training at the Police College at Tullyallen between December and January is being cancelled, which means the officers who were supposed to be getting trained will instead stay where they are over Christmas and New Year, and a small number of training staff will be freed up to join their frontline colleagues on operational duties over the festive period. The current intake of probationers will finish their training and then be deployed, and the force is saying that no job offers have been made to the intake that's been cancelled in January, and the application process will then continue for next year.
So why are they doing this?
To balance the books. The force was given a 6.3% increase in its budget this year, an extra £80 million, but at the time it said that because of inflation and pay pressures that would amount to a real terms reduction. They said hard choices would have to be made, a phrase we've become very familiar with recently, but commanding officers also committed themselves to balancing their budget, and 6 months in they're heading towards a £19 million overspend. The Scottish Police Authority, the oversight body, has told them they'll have to find ways to save money. It's said that the £90 million amounts to 1.5% of their overall budget of £1.3 billion. And that's been followed today by this announcement. Earlier on, I asked the Deputy Chief Constable of Police Scotland, Alan Spears, why that overspend had happened.
There's a range of challenges that we faced financially over the course of this year. We've had a police officer and staff pay award, we've had inflationary costs, we've had rising charges around energy, and we've had an increased spend on our overtime budget, largely driven by a very complex and growing demand that's placed on local policing. And it's been vitally important that we can continue to deliver an effective service in communities. As a consequence of that, we are spending some overtime.
And what's the reaction been to this, Dave?
Well, I think you're about to talk to the Police Federation. They're saying that they think this means that the total number of police officers could fall to below 16,000. Which would be the lowest it's ever been since the SNP took charge at Holyrood back in 2007. And the Scottish Government is saying it's increased police funding year on year since 2016. It says the postponement of recruiting is only for a short time and will allow the police to focus their resources during a busy period and, quote, ensure the recruitment standard is of the level they expect. Earlier on today, the First Minister was asked if today's announcement was his government's fault.
No, we funded, of course, Police Scotland fairly, an additional £80 million this year. That's a 6.3% increase in the finances for Police Scotland to manage their budget. It's worth saying, of course, that since we took office in 2007, there's now more police officers, more bodies in the beat, more per head in Scotland than other parts of the UK, and of course crime continues to be at one of its lowest levels on record.
Well, more cost-cutting measures are on the way. The police are planning to dispose of around 30 buildings. They brought those plans forward. Details will be announced soon, but inevitably, communities are going to lose their police stations that they've had for years. And all of this is happening just 4 days before Joe Farrell arrives from Durham Constabulary to be sworn in as the new Chief Constable. Welcome to the new job.
Well, thanks, Dave, for that. David Cowan there is our Home Affairs correspondent. Let's speak to the General Secretary, as Dave was saying, of the Police Federation, David Kennedy. Good evening to you, David.
Good evening, Fiona.
What do you make of all of this?
Well, it's absolutely horrendous. That's all you can really say about it. We have been saying for long and weary now that the finance that the police are getting is not sustainable, and for the police to police the way they have to, and it's all coming to fruition. And for the First Minister to continually compare his time with Wales, that's not what the people of Scotland want to hear. They want to know that Scotland's getting looked after. To be frank, what happens in England and Wales with a different policing model has nothing to do with Scotland.
So what's the impact of this, do you think? What will happen?
Well, the impact is, the short period that people are saying is actually half a year, it's 6 months. We're going to have no new police officers coming in, so they'll have no training during that time. There'll be no new police officers in the street, and every month police officers will retire, some other officers will leave. So if we look at the forecast, we think that's at roughly about 60 police officers a month. So we will be under 16,000 by the time we get to April 2024.
And what will this mean for safety? Let's talk safety. What does this mean for safety?
Well, in safety, you need police officers in the street, and I would ask members of the public to see, when are you seeing the police in the street? Are you going to police offices? Are you able to get a police officer there? And that's just not the case anymore. And that has an absolute bearing on the safety of the public and the safety of the community and the safety of police officers, because we need police officers. The more we need for the police officers to be safe as well. So the whole thing is a disaster.
And David, the Scottish Government says it's increased police funding year on year since 2016. It says that postponement of recruiting is only for a short time and will allow the police to focus their resources during a busy period. What do you make of that?
Well, it's saying it's increased funding, but the reality is half the funding from last year went on last year's pay award. So they're not increasing the funding, it's a real cut, because you have to invest, and there is no investment in the policing.
All right, well, thank you for being with us tonight, David. That's General Secretary of the Police Federation in Scotland, David Kennedy there. It's 27 minutes past 5 now. In a story which has been developing this afternoon, a man's appeared in court charged with soliciting to commit murder over an alleged plot to kidnap TV presenter Holly Willoughby. I spoke to our reporter Jack Ewing to get some details on the story.
It's quite a troubling case here. Holly Willoughby didn't present Thursday's edition of the This Morning programme, and I'm sure viewers would have been waiting to see the presenter on the show. Well, it turns out she wasn't on the show because she was reportedly under police protection. Gavin Plum, a 36-year-old man, was arrested on Wednesday as part of an ongoing police investigation, according to Kent Police. He was charged with soliciting to commit murder over a reported plot to kidnap the TV presenter. The story, which was first reported in The Sun, said that the police had found sinister messages threatening to kidnap and seriously harm the star. This comes after a very difficult few months for Willoughby following the fallout from Philip Schofield's departure from the programme. She'd taken a break over the summer.
So what has happened since the arrest, Jack?
Well, the suspect, who's from Pottersfield, Harlow, appeared in Chelmsford Magistrates Court earlier for a short hearing. He's a 36-year-old security officer in the town. Mr. Plum was remanded in custody to appear for a plea hearing at Chelmsford Crown Court on November 3rd. He's accused of soliciting, encouraging, persuading, endeavouring to persuade or proposing to a third party to murder Willoughby between Tuesday and Wednesday. It's also alleged that between Monday and Thursday, he was formulating a plan with a third party. He allegedly encouraged that third party to travel to the UK to carry out the plan and was assembling a kidnap restraint kit capable of encouraging or assisting the commission of the kidnap of Willoughby. In a statement, Detective Superintendent Rob Kirby said this was an extremely fast-paced investigation, with many of our officers and national partners working overnight to secure these charges. The safeguarding of any victim is paramount and will continue to